Video is recording. All right. Let's push this down, pull up my notes. Okay, so we're back to the UX Life and Career video series. And you thought, what, another video? I thought we were going to stop this after you got a job at number 8. Well, we're on number 9 because I got fired. I could say, technically I wasn't fired because I was an independent contractor, not an employee, or split hairs some other ways. But fired has a more grabbing title for this video, and I've never been fired or laid off before, so this is new territory, new achievement unlocked, I guess you could say. Let me recap. I started part-time for this startup back in July, and I did part-time work for 2 weeks. It was only amounted to 14 hours, and it was kind of a trial run to see how I got along with the team, if I was going to mesh well. They were looking to hire someone very quickly. I was recommended by my predecessor, and we worked on some stuff part-time, and then they decided I was the guy, and I started full-time August 12th. The original plan was for me to work full-time August 12th to sometime in October. I later found out that was October 15th. Actually ended up being 6 weeks longer than that. And then I was going to be part-time thereafter with sort of like a handshake agreement that they would have some non-UX stuff for me to do so that hopefully I wouldn't be looking for other clients during that time. I have lots of stories about this startup. I could tell all sorts of stories. I do have an NDA, so I have to kind of be careful how I frame these stories in sort of a generic way as to not to divulge any work product. But I don't think that'll be a problem for today. And I'm not going to tell too many stories, but I think when I start telling the stories, you'll understand why it's not the worst thing in the world that I'm not at this startup anymore. So why did I get fired? Possibility 1, I was just bad at the job. I was inexperienced. I am somewhat inexperienced. To give you some background, I did my first enterprise UX product in 2019, but I didn't have any formal UX training. My degree is in interactive art, and this was a while back when we weren't really using the term UX. Anyways, doing that project in 2019 made me decide that I wanted to pursue UX in a more meaningful way. I took a boot camp. I graduated in 2023 and looked for work for a while. I landed this full-time gig with the startup August 12th, 2024. I went through the same boot camp as my predecessor, so I hoped that my inexperience wasn't going to be a huge factor, even though I knew I was going to be the sole designer. It was very scary, but I thought, she did this, so I must be able to do it too, right? Now, she had been doing some other part-time work stuff. I think we graduated from the program around the same time, and I might have been a little rustier because she had been working a little bit recently, so I did have concerns. But at some point, you just have to go for it. And they were in a hurry to find someone. We negotiated a deal. I was working full-time at a warehouse at the time, so I went ahead and went for it, right? I did do a lot of things for them. There's a lot of reasons I feel like I could have done things better, but I feel like time was an issue, and that brings us to possibly number 2. I think there were a lot of unrealistic expectations for this position, and those weren't communicated very well when I agreed to the position. This is going to bring us to the first story. So my first full day of work was August 12th, and I had to explain to the CEO what a mobile app was. And I said, it's like when you go on your phone, you hit an icon, like that's a dedicated thing. It's a native app. It lives on your phone. It's not a responsive web page. I asked, and I said, are we doing a mobile responsive website or are we doing a mobile app? And she said, mobile responsive website. We're not doing an app. I said, okay, cool. On my second day of this job, I had a meeting with the CTO and engineering, and the CEO wasn't there that day. And they're talking about the app this and the app that, and I realized that developers and engineers sometimes use app just to refer to like the overall package of the thing, even if it's an online website. And I said, I have to stop. I just have to ask, are we building a mobile responsive app or are we building a native app? And the CTO says to me, we're doing iOS, we're doing Android, and we're doing mobile responsive web, and we're doing it by October 15th. And I was just kind of sat there and like, oh, that is not what the CEO told me yesterday. And he said, oh, well, she's mistaken. I'll talk to her again. We'll get it all sorted out. And by the end of the week, Like, it became clear that that was the objective, was to do the design in those three things. I'm the only designer. I had just started August 12th. They wanted to do this in 2 months for October 15. And I told them, I said, I'm terrified. I don't see how this is going to happen. And they said, oh, don't worry about it. We're going to do it in React Native, and we'll just push this product out this way and that way. And I tried to explain that other companies have dedicated teams for iOS and Android and for the web, and to expect me to build, or rather design, for all three was not super realistic. And they tried to explain how they were going to do it in React Native. I don't think they realized that, like, iOS and Android have these very different standards in terms of icons and placements, and your apps have to get tested and approved. And, like, they were aware of some of this, but I don't think they were aware of all of it, especially some of the visual standards for, say, iOS are rather strict. So I said, okay, here's how I can sort of accept this. If you want to try and take these designs and make them work for all these things, that's fine. But I'm going to prioritize a mobile responsive web design. And that's what we ended up doing. In fact, we ended up not building apps at all. That's another story. But that first, like, expectation of we're going to build for these three platforms, you're our only designer, we have 2 full-time engineers and a part-time CTO, and our CEO is part-time, like, these things were all that super unrealistic. And yeah, it was an eye-opener. Second thing that I think is just kind of speaks to the expectations. I talked to a lot of people, a lot of peers, mentors, things like that, as I was on this project, about my frustrations and how it could go better and things like that. And a friend of mine said this to me, and he has worked for startups and started his own startups. And what he said was, when you have a founder with a non-tech startup, they invariably become their own bottleneck. And I believe that is what has happened very often on this project. And I think that'll come out with some of these other stories. The next kind of red flag I had from the CEO was during a meeting. She said, we kind of went between, we started using, MVP, most viable product, and we soon switched to MLP, most lovable product. And one of the things she said, like halfway through, as we were struggling with designs and limitations of engineering, she said, well, I think the MLP should be as close to the final product as possible. And that was a big red flag for me right there. It was like, I didn't even know how to respond. I don't think I did respond, because that's not how design works. It's iterative. There is no final. There's no final product. The final state of the product is what that product looks like the day before you go into bankruptcy, or you sell the product, or you shutter the project completely. There's no final state. It's always changing. I think whatever the nature is, whatever your nature is as a founder, is you have to realize the name of the product could change, your branding colors might change, the way you solve the problem might change, the problem you're solving might change. You might think you're solving for one problem and realize that you're in a better position to attack a different problem, which happens sometimes, especially in like a startup capacity, because you're looking for your niche, your opportunity, the problem you can solve. But she had something in her mind that she wanted out in the digital world. She had a very interesting problem to solve, but was very particular about how it got solved and didn't really want to do user research. And this maybe brings me to reason 3, is maybe I was just a bad fit for this company. They knew they needed a designer, but they wanted a pixel pusher. I was told at one point that they felt like they got a lot of pushback from me, and I feel like that is part of the process, is questioning things. I would get direction to, put this screen in or that screen in and add this feature, and I would ask, what does this do for the user? How does this solve the problem we're doing? And a lot of times the answers were just, well, I think it would be cool, or it's 2024, and this should be cutting edge. It should be doing this kind of thing. And it's difficult to come back from that. And eventually I realized that, my voice was not being heard. At one point, the CEO told me, I have these ideas, and it's your job to fish them out of my head. I'm like, I don't know about this. And we had some interesting meetings where we would get together. Sometimes she would sketch things out and say, like, well, I think we should do this with the icons. And like, this doesn't relate anything to your product at all. Like, we'll sit here and listen to you do this, but it was interesting. She would try, to have me pick colors in Figma that she thought looked good, and I'm looking at like these gradients and thinking, oh, this looks awful, but we need to get this thing built. I'd had this thing in mind where, like, when I have some time, even if I have to do it off the clock, I will build a much better UI, and I'll implement like a version 2 or 3, and I'll just set it off to the side, and I'll have it someday. Like, what do you think about these changes for the screens to make them look fresh, make them look better, whatever? I didn't even get that far. I think another part of maybe being a bad fit or not the right fit was that I had difficulty articulating decisions. And in the past, I found different ways to be diplomatic, but I think sometimes that's hard to do when you're on a tight schedule, and I think it's just you have to adjust your method depending on the personalities you're dealing with. And like I said earlier, I feel like there were a lot of times it just wasn't being heard. This brings up another story where we had a part-time startup coach and we had a part-time copywriter. We had a section of this app that was sort of a screening/registration thing. You're signing up, you're putting in your address, your email, some very basic questions to make sure you are qualified to be a user, to be an applicant. And it was pretty straightforward. We had some copy up there already that I'd just like written kind of ad hoc on the fly. And the CEO said to me, well, I'd like to spend the weekend tweaking the copy on my own before we hand it over to the copywriter. And, that doesn't hurt me in any way. It seems like a waste of her time, but if she wants to try writing copy prior to giving it to the copywriter, like, who am I to argue? And so I set up a page in Figma with just this section where she could adjust the copy without changing the originals, etc., over the weekend. And when I looked at it on Monday, she hadn't changed the copy at all. She'd put in all these notes where, like, well, when they put in their address, I want to put in a video about where I'm from and what it's like and where the other co-founder is from. And all of them were marked up with these things like, let's add this feature here where there's a video explaining this, or there's this extra copy talking about this. And I'm looking at it just thinking to myself, like, we are trying to get someone through this process as quickly as possible. We're not inundating them with more information. And in the moment, I'm like, do I just write these comments? Do I ask for a meeting or whatever? So I actually reached out to the coach that we had at the time, and I said, I want to make sure you and I are in alignment on this because I don't feel like any of this belongs. She was like, oh, yeah, you're right. I've got a meeting with her and the copywriter momentarily. Like, I'm sure we'll talk about it. And then they invited me to that meeting at the last minute. Or actually, while they were in the meeting, they asked me if I could jump on the call and asked me for my thoughts on, these notes the CEO had put in there. And it took all three of us to kind of convince her, like, none of this belongs here. And I feel like if it had been just me, she wouldn't have believed me or something. And I feel like that was something that was part of the story all along. But when all three of us said, like, yes, none of this belongs here, we're trying to get through this process with the user as quickly as possible. We're not giving them videos or extra copy to read. Because it was three of us, we could kind of talk her out of that. But these are the kinds of stories I have from the startup. Also, maybe in terms of being a bad fit, I feel like the work-life balance wasn't great. We were independent contractors, everyone working on this project. And I feel like there was a lot of expectations that you should be available for a lot of different meetings, a lot of different times. I had morning meetings, I had evening meetings, I had Saturday and Sunday morning meetings. I had a 6 a.m. Sunday meeting at one point, and it's like, why are we doing this? And part of the reason was because our CTO and our CEO were both working full-time jobs elsewhere. We didn't have a product manager, and so these were the times that were good for them to get together while the rest of us were doing things other times. It's like, I feel like if you're ever going to be an independent contractor, make sure somewhere in your schedule you set up a firm like, I am not available during this time kind of block in your contract, so that you don't have to have a 6 a.m. Sunday morning meeting. Another story I have about being a bad fit. This was super awkward. The morning after the presidential election, we had a stand-up or a morning meeting. I forget what the nature of the meeting was, and I would think I was a minute or two late. I don't know if I had technical difficulties or what the deal was. They were kind of commiserating because Kamala Harris lost the election to Donald Trump. And they asked me, like, John, do you have anything you want to share about your reflections on this election or how you're feeling about it? And I thought, this is super weird. One, to assume, and I don't want to get very political here, I'm not a Donald Trump supporter, but not being a Donald Trump supporter does not equate to being a Kamala Harris supporter either. And that's probably all I want to say about that for now. I just thought that was super weird that, like, you would just assume that I was on board with your candidate, or that I was half as passionate about you or half as disappointed that, such and such candidate didn't win. And there was no response that I could have made that I feel like would have, looking back at it now with clear eyes, I should have said I don't feel comfortable talking about this, but then I feel like they would have assumed I voted for Donald Trump, and it's no one's business who I voted for. That's kind of how I feel, especially, at work. Be different if we were friends and we were, agreed to have this conversation about politics. But to bring it up first thing in the morning, I thought that was weird. It made me uncomfortable. And it was just another, like, in the back of my mind, it was another thing where, like, I feel like I don't belong here. So reason number 4, maybe that, and maybe this has something to do with it. I feel like I wasn't thought of as a team player, and maybe that's due to a lot of things. Maybe I pushed back too much. Maybe I wasn't diplomatic enough in trying to articulate my difference of opinions. We had, in first week of December, we were scheduled to have an in-person meeting. We were all going to meet north of Boston in Amesbury, Massachusetts, and at first I had reservations because the original plan was for me to stay at the CTO's house with the CTO and the CEO, and we were all going to meet there to do work. This felt super weird to me. I can't think of, like, a business situation where you'd say, like, hey, come out and stay at so-and-so's house. I don't know. I have a super low social battery, and it was only, I forget what it was, 2 or 3 days, but that was going to drain me, to not be able to feel like I was on my own. I did express some reservations about this. Eventually, I did buy a ticket. I was going to go. I had a hotel reservation. There was a hotel right there in town near the CTO's house. Even if they weren't going to pay me back for the hotel, I thought, at least this way I go out there and I'm a team player, even if I'm out the hotel, which shouldn't be my responsibility as an independent contractor, right? It just shouldn't be. At the last minute, my dog got sick. My dog got a parasitic cyst. I didn't know this. I'm a somewhat new dog owner, that boarding places won't take your dog if you don't have a negative sample or test, and it didn't come back negative. It came back positive. So I couldn't find an option in time. I ended up not going. I feel like that made it look like I wasn't a team player. So how did it shake out? Initially, I was told that after the in-person in December, now mind you, I've been full-time this whole time. Originally, I was supposed to go back to part-time October 15th, but we didn't meet that ship date at all. We did the soft launch that first week of December. It didn't go great. I was told I was going to go part-time, but there was never any communication about how many hours they wanted or anything like that. The CEO had said, let's have a meeting. And this is now the second week of December after the in-person. We had a couple meetings scheduled. She would cancel and reschedule, and then we had Christmas and everything. And finally, we had our meeting on New Year's Eve, and it was pretty short. She made it clear that they found another designer they wanted to work with, and I was going to do the handoff to that designer, and that was pretty much it. Initially, I felt okay and kind of relieved, because after you've heard some of these stories, you realize, like, this was kind of a stressful place to work. And I feel like even when I wasn't sitting at the desk working on things, I was just like actively worried about everything. I do kind of feel like in hindsight that the CEO had made the decision to get rid of me before New Year's Eve. And if, she could have let me know before Christmas, I would have made some different decisions. I would have spent less on Christmas. I would have put more money in my emergency savings instead of paying down long-term debt like my mortgage, things like that. But that's neither here nor there. It's over. It's done with. I can breathe a little easier, but the thing is now I do need a job. So what's next? I am currently studying for the FINRA Series 65 license exam. That is not necessarily a UX thing, but I'm hoping that taking this exam, getting this knowledge, possibly even working for an investment firm for a short amount of time, maybe that's a year, maybe it's 2, will give me some valuable experience in getting employment with a fintech company in a UX capacity. And some of this is just centered around my own personal interest in personal finance and investments. So it's something I've been thinking about doing for a while. I'm a little further behind than I would like to be. We're a little past the halfway mark in January, and I'm not halfway through my study materials yet. I've been attending some UX workshops. I'll probably attend some more. I might host some workshops I might host a variety of workshops. I'll talk more about that in the future. And I might take some time to revisit some hobbies. So that's kind of where I'm at now. I don't feel awful about it. I'll start worrying more towards the end of February if I don't have some promising prospects lined up. Anyway, I feel like I should be more depressed about it, and on some days I am. But it was an experience. I have some stories about it. I do have an NDA, but I think I can still write a pretty interesting case study about things I learned, things that could have gone better, and I think I can take this experience somewhere else and build upon it. So that's all I've got for now. Thanks so much for your support over the years. Feel free to leave any comments or questions. I'll try to get to them as I can. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you soon.